out on that one, but I don't think it'll work because New York has a very strong public policy, and while there are things you are allowed to waive in a lease, you have a right of first speech. You can waive your right of free speech. It's something you're allowed to waive. You can't be forced to give it up. And the same is true of the implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing in a contract. I think when it comes down to it, New York will look at these sort of fictitious or playful attempts to extend the primary term of a lease beyond its 5-year or 3-year or whatever date. And the courts are going to look at, is this really a good faith attempt to develop a will, or is this just window dressing? And there's a lot that may go into that, but I think ultimately the theory of parking a bulldozer once every 6 months will not work in New York, because New York is, the courts very strongly protect what are designated as public policies, rules that exist. A classic example is usurious interest rates. It doesn't matter if you have a good faith business basis to believe that this loan is so high risk that you're going to charge this person 35% on the loan for a refrigerator. New York will not allow it even if you contract away your right. And I think that's the area that they're getting into in New York law. But again, a case like that is going to be very fact specific. It's going to depend on what does the lease say, what actually has occurred. Just running out and putting surveying tape up is one thing, but actually have spent $3,000 on a survey is a different thing. What did they do after they did the survey? Did they wait and then 5 months and 30 days later send someone out with a load of gravel? Or were they making continuous good faith efforts to advance production? The important thing to remember is that there's a difference between a primary and a secondary term. And the primary term has some extensions in it, sometimes including a right to extend the lease by offering another payment, whether it's a bonus payment or whether it's a delay rental payment. That'll all be defined by what is in your lease. There's also something called a secondary term. A secondary term is not an extension of the primary term. The secondary term exists when a well is started, it goes into production, it's permitted, and they're putting a hole in the ground. Secondary terms can extend leases for quite a substantial period of time, and a good lease should have clauses about shut-in limitations and what happens if they go out of production for a given period of time. They drill a well, they produce it, they flare it. Oh, we don't want to send it to market right now. We want to sit on it for 87 years until the rates go up high enough. Your lease better deal with that, because a lot of leases have storage rights, and their answer is going to be, well, we're storing it. So there are a lot of issues, and it's very specific to your lease, but generally I don't think the scenario you present is going to carry a lot of weight in New York.
Great.
Frank Proto, Slaterville. This is sort of a follow-up to David Vandermark's question about mortgages. Sometimes the rule of unintended consequences prevails. This is not a statement or a question in favor or opposed to moratoriums or bans, but just the potential consequences of what it could lead to. We've all been treated recently to our town and county tax bill. Some of us have actually paid them. I hope most of you have actually paid them. There's a value on that tax bill that values the town. So many millions of dollars. We all, because of our properties, contribute to that value. What would be, two parts, right? What would be the impact of the moratorium on the value of the town, even while the moratorium was in effect, assuming that it did what Linda was asking for, that we just did, or the town just did those things that it already has the power to do. Would it decrease the value of properties because of, it would put a limit, if you would, on the value, and somebody view it as that. And the unintended consequence piece is the town occasionally borrows money and bonds for that. And the town's value often helps to set the rate. Would we end up, could we, not would we, could we end up paying more for borrowed money as a town because of a moratorium or a ban? I'm not in favor or opposed to it. I'm just asking if this goes forward. Is this something that we ought to look into for a year down the road, 5 years down the road, or whatever, because of the that could cost us all more money because the bond may cost us more. Is that something that has been looked into, or could be looked into? Two-part question.
Okay. You know, I'm not an economist and I'm not a land appraiser or assessor, so I'm not sure what the answer to the first question is, honestly. I don't know if the existence of mineable quantities of gas underneath a piece of land would increase or decrease the value of the land. I think that depends on who's the buyer. There are people running around buying up chunks of farmland speculating that they'll be able to own this land free and clear because the lease rights will be so valuable. But on the flip side of that, there's a segment of the market that won't even consider buying a piece of property that has a lease on it. So how do those two competing interests, one where you may get more value from someone who wants to speculate on what's there, and one where you may get less value from someone who doesn't want to go near a leased piece of property because of the risk of surface improvements or anything else that they may think is harmful to their intended use of the land or life, the world as we know it, however they characterize it. I don't know how those two competing market forces will have an effect in Tompkins County or in New York State, and I would suspect somebody has started to look at that, but I'm not aware of any study that's out on that exact question yet. As far as the bond market goes, I haven't seen any rate differentials anywhere in the state of New York based upon whether a municipality has or doesn't have leases, or whether a municipality has or doesn't have wells. As of right now, there is authority to tax wells as infrastructure. There is an assessment process to determine if a land value to a well based upon the cost of that infrastructure, and the formula is somewhat, it's a blended formula. It's like looking at what is the value of a rented space. Well, part of it is determined from what it would cost to build it, and based on and how is it depreciated based on current condition. And part of it is the income approach. What's generated from that land? Obviously, a place that has a low occupancy rate tends to have less value than a place that has a very high occupancy rate. And so it's those different income and infrastructure costs that go into how they determine assessment. And in fact, ORPS, the Office of Real Property Services in New York, is doing training right now to train assessors how to assess the value of these things and create separate tax parcels surrounding those wells in the event they are something that adds value and can be taxed. Whether or not that added value becomes market value if the property is placed on the market is going to depend on who your buyer is. But I don't know the answer to that question. I haven't seen any impact on bond rates, but since the infrastructure wouldn't be town-owned property, it wouldn't affect the town's ability to borrow, except to the extent that if the town had a higher income, higher revenues based upon real property taxes, there are some limited situations where that can affect how much you can bond. For instance, special districts. If you had water districts or sewer districts or something like that, there are formulas where it can't be more than 10% of a certain borrowing limit unless you get comptroller approval. But so I guess in short, my question is, I don't know. That's probably something someone should look at. And I haven't seen any differential in bond rates based on being, northern Cayuga County where there is no mining versus Broome County where there is mining. So I don't think it will affect the bond market, but we'll see.
Frank, before you ask that question, I just want to tell you that I have been in contact with Jay Franklin, who's the head of the assessment department. And this was probably 6 months, maybe a little longer data. At that time, because he's always looking at what things are selling for versus what they're assessed at. At that time, he's not able to find either any change, up or down, as a result of gas drilling. So as Guy mentioned, there could be, I think, a swing one way or another. And at that time, 6 months ago, he was not able to pick up anything as a result of gas drilling affecting sale of vacant land or property within Tompkins County. But it's a good question. So I know that they've been working on assessments, and so it's one that I'll definitely ask again to find out where we stand. So now you can ask your question again.
No, stay there.
Sure.
Please, stay there.
Thank you.
That's if the town permits drilling. Guy was describing the situation with rigs and, the value. What I'm asking as well is, what about the moratorium period? When everything is prevented until all the, whatever study is that takes place. Could you ask Jay if there would be a change in the value of the town, which is where I was going with the effect on the bond rating, that for that period of time, I don't know how long it would be, but anyway, would it be worth asking him that?
Well, I will ask him that. He has a few months more data on a couple of other towns that have been active and banned, so you can see if that made any difference. I don't know if he's had long enough to have any change in it, but I can ask him that question. But I do know from my previous sessions with the assessment offices, they try not to predict the future. They only try to work on the data that's already been existing. So he won't predict the future. He will only tell you based on what he's seen in sales, what the effect has been.
Okay. I want to just notice that it's coming up on 9 o'clock, which is our agreed upon ending time. And so I want to first just get a sense, how many other people still have questions? One.
Was this
For real
supposed to be on
time?
the moratorium?
Well,
Well, I wanted to ask Guy a question.
okay, so there's two more questions. 3? Okay. My guess is we're not going to get through 3 questions by 9 o'clock. So are people willing to stay a little bit longer, or do some people want to leave when it gets to 9 o'clock? How should we handle that?
Let's see if they...
Okay. All right, we'll go till 9 o'clock, see how far we get, and then we'll check in. Okay. Grants.
My question is for Guy, and it's a follow-up on Frank's question on Mary Alice Colbert on Paul Road. So, the value of property. I'm wondering how widespread. We got a notice from our homeowners insurance saying that there is a pollution exclusion on our property. That if there's any pollution on our property, they are not held liable. I'm wondering how much of that is being seen in the broader scope of things we don't have a lease, but there are lease lines around us. So I'm seeing that.
Standard, almost every homeowner's policy in the state of New York, and I would venture to say probably in the United States, Canada, you name it, has an environmental liability exclusion, has a pollution exclusion. It's pretty standard. I would guess that every single person here who has renters or homeowners insurance does not have coverage. You can purchase environmental insurance if you want to do phase 1 and phase 2 studies, but it's really prohibitively expensive, and usually you only go down that road if you have a prior spill that's been cleaned up and you can't find a buyer unless you also give them insurance. So the short answer is nobody has it. You're not in a unique boat. I don't have it, and I'm not going to pay for that endorsement. There was a commercial property in Tompkins County that did have to buy that, and I believe the coverage was $240,000 for that endorsement.